The Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to The Unconventional Therapists. I am your host, Dave, and I am joined here with my co-host, Greg. Together, we are just two co-hosts on a podcast, I guess. Sort of.
Yeah, you could call us that.
Greg's kind of paying attention, but not really.
You could call us friends till the end. You call us a lot of things.
We'll just, for the sake of this, we'll just do co-hosts today.
Okay. All right. Well, if you want to keep it
probably after
not
this
non-committal.
Episode. Probably after this episode.
Yeah.
How was your week, Greg?
It was good. I was digging into this topic really heavy, and you have given me the gift of saying, yeah, Greg, it's okay if we cover this thing that you've been researching to death on the podcast, so that, it's not all for nothing.
Sure.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And, honestly, I believe that this is going to be a topic that some people are really interested in. And it's heavy, but it's also, I think, important in a lot of ways. But let me frame it by asking you this question. Is it possible, do you think, to believe your own lies?
I think that in order for a lie to be believable, I think it has to be, or, I believe there is a sense of belief the person has in it. Like whether it's belief in the lie itself or belief in the reason they're telling the lie to be a valid reason. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about, what about a cult, like Heaven's Gate? Remember, I know you love this cult. You mention it all the time. When the ship didn't come, they had to start, I think, in some level, believing what is essentially a lie.
Yes. They had to start to say, well, that, there was several times that happened in that specific cult.
Yeah.
And each time they had to say, oh, well, it's actually, that wasn't the one that we were waiting for. It's this other thing coming. And in order for them to be able to move forward, they had to kind of start to believe their lie. And then there's also cases where I think someone believes that they're doing good for either the better of others or the better for their relationship. So they will believe in their reasoning behind it. Like I said, justification, I think is an example of that. So that they may not believe the lie itself, but they will believe in their reasoning behind it and therefore feel it's a necessary thing to do.
Okay. All right. Well, I looked this up because I was trying to understand this, and there's a term called mythomania, and I guess that's kind of along the same lines of believing your own lies. But what I'm going to talk about today is a case where someone who was extremely intelligent, I think, told a lie and wrote a book based on untruths. Okay. And this book led to the death of between 200 and 500,000 people in Europe, 85% of them being women. This book is called the Malleus Maleficarum, and people know it as the Hammer of Witches.
Ah.
Yeah, this old thing, right? I mean, do you have any, what's your history with this?
Zero.
Nothing?
Zero.
Really? You've it's never appeared in your life?
Never in my lifetime. Until last week when I dabbled in it for a minute.
Yeah. Well, look, to me, this is a super interesting topic because I think that we've done the toxic masculinity thing, and I'm going to find something in history for Valentine's Day that showed that this is something really attacking women that no one really pays attention to. Just in the name of itself, Malleus is a masculine tense word, Maleficarum is a female tense word. So right there, it's sort of this male versus female text. You know what I mean? It's right there in the title. Yep. And the author, Heinrich Kramer, writes a justification of why he wrote this. And this is in 1486, this thing published. It says, ever since the fall, The devil has not ceased to attack the church, and despite Christ dying for our sins, he finds his way to assault men through their works. These attacks manifest in forms of daily misfortunes, domestic animals getting, disrupted, hurt, whatever, crops. And he says that this text, with the support of the Pope and esteemed colleagues, will serve as a tool to help eradicate the destructive heretics. So this book was born as a tool to get rid of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
So
right.
that's what it was made for. And this guy, Heinrich Kramer, the guy who wrote it, I mean, we just did an episode of narcissistic personality disorder. To me, this seems like the kind of person, you have to believe you're smart. You have to believe that you're more important than everyone else. Like, he's not a well-liked guy. He rises to as a role of inquisitor. He's not liked by anybody that works with him. He calls out the emperor in Germany. He's inspected for embezzling funds. So he's a hypocrite. He's doing all these terrible things, but he's got the backing of the Pope for whatever reason. And I thought it would be interesting to kind of try to find out like the psychology of this. Like, why was this guy doing this? Like, why before this book's even written, he's going around to, towns, and no one really approved of his message or his methods, but he was able to burn women without any problems whatsoever.
He was kind of like a Van Helsing for women, like against women. Like Van Helsing being like the Dracula hunter, the vampire hunter. This guy is just hunting women and saying that they're witches.
So you're onto something there. So in one of these little towns of Innsbruck, there was this lady, Helena, right?
Yeah.
Schuberin was her last name. And Heinrich Kramer, the guy who wrote this book, he offered 40 days of indulgences to those who would help find witches in the town. So indulgences are those things where it's like you are able to sin as much as you want for 40 days. So it's kind of like a carrot and a stick right there. And there was this woman, Helena, who spits on him, tells him that he's evil. She says, quote, "Let the fallen evil take you." She has this reputation for speaking her mind, being strong. She's like skillful. She's a midwife. She's all these great things. And Heinrich Kramer, of course, is like, that is a witch. So he tries to have her put, tries to try her on a church court, and she gets a lawyer because she's like a successful part of the community, and she gets off and gets all the other people off that she was with, like who she was accused with.
Yeah.
So how do you think this is going to make this guy feel, right?
More vengeful.
Absolutely. So this incident of this woman kind of outdoing him, outsmarting him, and winning is basically the reason why this book is written. Okay. That woman. Yeah. So what do you think, Dave? Like when I say in the beginning, this is 200 to 500,000 people dead. Now, does this woman have any responsibility fall on her for being the catalyst?
I had heard some individuals talking about this, and one of their suggestions was something about sort of like a blow to his ego. And it made me almost look at this as if, are they suggesting, or is there any suggestion that like he, these women were resistant to maybe his advances, which made him spiteful and want to punish them for that?
So why not? Like he's a man of the cloth, right? So off the bat, maybe he certainly can't enjoy, I don't know, the pleasures of the flesh. Did she, did he maybe have a thing for a woman at one point and they scorned him or whatever? I don't know. Like there is something there that's very, like he mentions all throughout this book, sorceresses. It's always the feminine words that he's using. So he's not looking for anything but women. So yeah, you're right. It makes me think that something did happen that has to do with I'm coming for women now in this gigantic, huge book that's like, 600 pages.
So Greg, just between you and I, can you never say the term pleasures of the flesh again?
That's what I say when I come home. Is anybody up for any pleasures of the flesh tonight? No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's uncomfortable.
So I mean, I think when you're talking about like the motivations for this thing, yeah, I think that's probably one of them. I think another one, this was a book that was unfortunately, this guy was really kind of talented with his words because there was only one other book at the time that was selling more copies, and that was the Bible. So
Right.
this book offered some stuff. It offered explaining the inexplicable. How often do we want to do that? Right? It offers this like tangible response to this perceived war of good and evil.
Mhm.
It's, defense. It teaches you how to defend yourself against sorcery and witchcraft. And people are thinking there's witches everywhere. It's like this scary thing. And Heinrich says he takes himself out of the blame of it too, because he says that he compiled this like almost like a Grimm's fairy tale thing of things that we already knew through folklore and theologians and just all kinds of stories that he's compiled, and we can use this now as a tool. So he takes the onus off himself. He's like, this is just something that I put together. This isn't something that I invented. This is something that I created as a tool for us to be able to use to protect ourselves and to persecute witches, which
Yeah.
is insane.
So, I mean, at this time, like you could basically say anything is somewhat of a threat to your Christian faith, and it would have the utmost like response to it, right? Like
Oh, absolutely.
people, like if you like, because that's a lot of this claim all has to do with just it being a threat to Christian faith. So it's almost like it's foolproof because like you said, all right, so the Bible is the biggest selling book of this time at this period, right? Other than this book. For them to reject this book is almost like rejecting Christian faith. So it's like foolproof because they can't say no, like the church might be able to, but regular day people can't, right? Because if
No.
you do, you're basically rejecting Christian faith and saying that the devil isn't real and there's no threat here, right?
Yeah, and people don't want to get on the like. So when someone says something like a horrible tweet, or someone says something, like we see it all the time nowadays, where someone says something at like maybe a news anchor, and then everyone kind of gets on board against them because they don't want to be seen as the person who is doing this thing, like
Yeah.
right. So we let
Yeah.
them get publicly shamed, even though we're like, ooh, I don't know, I can kind of see what you mean by that. And it's funny that you mentioned that, Dave. You're picking up on that without without reading it. In what they did, so that big problem with the lawyer, right? So this Heinrich Kramer guy goes, okay, fine, you want to get a lawyer? He says, now, according to this, God's law, witches are not able to pick their own advocates, so they can't choose their own lawyers. Also, if you're a lawyer and you take on one of these cases, if you lose, that means that you're defending someone who is paired up with Satan, and now you're a witch.
Yeah. They use the word heresies, right?
Yes.
For what would that be? That was for like witchcraft.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
heresy. And yeah, so if you're paired up with someone who's a heretic, then you are a demon yourself, I would imagine, and you would also be at risk of being persecuted as well. And I know you said it's mostly women, but also if why take that chance?
Oh, absolutely. It is mostly women, but it would definitely be the lawyers that defending women. Because that after that first case, Heinrich's like, all right, how do we close this? How do we not allow this to happen again?
Yeah.
So before we get much further, let's just talk about like what this thing actually is. Because I don't think people are really understanding it. It's this infamous treaty it's this gigantic tome of a book on witchcraft that would popularize, categorize the ideas, magic, witchcraft, and was used as an instrument to combat this witch craze in Europe. Like this thing's a tool, and it's the way it's broken down, the way you have to sort of address this text. It's difficult. It's broken down into a bunch of parts, and these parts have questions in them, like asking, well, how do you know if why is it usually that women are witches? Why are midwives super dangerous? Like it has tons and tons of these questions. Like remember when we were talking about those in Salem, we were talking about like how do you find a witch? How do you kill a witch? How do you do all those things to a witch? This is all comes from here, right?
Yeah.
So part one talks about the proof, quote unquote, of the existence of sorcery. Part two talks about the elements involved in the performance of sorcery. Part three is the practice of inflicting and curing forms of sorcery. And part four is judicial extermination of sorceresses. And that's sorceresses. That's pulled from the book. And then 20 methods of passing sentence. So this thing is just a legal text based like it's made up. It's like you're playing pretend. It's no
Yeah.
fair, right?
It's a dummy's guide for witch hunting.
It
That's
really
the
is.
modern day title.
It is. Like why like this thing it's powerful, and I don't know, it's making me think like, is this book evil? Is it possible for an object to be evil? What
Is
do you
the
think?
book evil?
Yeah.
No more evil than social media.
Okay. So it's like twisted. So the book is twisted. It's like
I mean,
twisted.
anybody can put anything in a book, right?
Yeah.
It's not the book itself is not evil, obviously. The content could be deemed evil, but that's all subjective. Because what I
Right.
find evil, you might find, well, actually, vice versa.
Yeah.
What you find evil, I might find benign
Or entertaining.
or entertaining. Exactly. It's, but again, I don't think anything without life to me wouldn't be evil. What's evil is the behaviors and actions of the people that decide to interpret it in whatever way they decide to interpret it, right?
Yes. All right. Well, how about this? How about, because I'm thinking of something while you're saying that. What if this book had no author and it was just found and people used and the
What?
clergy
What?
like used it. It was like this anonymous book and someone picked it up and was like, "Oh my God, like look at all these rules and laws."
All right, Greg, yes. In your hypothetical,
Okay. All right.
non-existent, non-realistic theory, yes, Greg, that would be called the Necronomicon. And yes,
Okay.
that would be evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So a book.
All right.
So I guess what you're saying is a book could be evil.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right, this thing is based on lies, and mainly it's based on this.
I thought you were going to say, all right, that's the end of the podcast.
No. Dave, unfortunately for you, we have plenty to go. So this thing is based on lies and the suspicion of power of women. And I've compiled a little bit of list here on like why that's true. So this thing it had a papal bull, which is sort of an edict from the Pope saying that they endorse something. But that was given to Heinrich way before he ever wrote this. So it really wasn't endorsed by the Pope. The book also implies in the beginning that Maximilian, the future Holy Roman Empire, endorsed the text. He didn't. He never did that. So what Heinrich is saying is that the top secular and top religious leaders say that this is a good book and this is good to go, and neither were true.
Okay.
So if you're like a layman and you're like, hey, look, this book is endorsed by the Pope and it's endorsed by our ruler, the Emperor. I mean, that's going to hold a lot of weight.
Yeah, and I'm not going to like know the wiser back then.
Of course not. Of course not. You're like, that's good as gold, right? And they also say in this book that clergymen and inquisitors are shielded from the power of witches. So if someone were to say, can you imagine if Heinrich came across a woman who was like, I can write a 600-page book about everything I know about witchcraft. They would be like, oh, you're on fire right now. We're like burning you literally right now. But he can write this crazy book, knowing every single thing and spell and everything witches do. And he is shielded from any consequences because he's an inquisitor. That is dark.
You know, it's funny. All the things that like make this like made people want to read this back then, or made this gave this validity or whatever, all that stuff nobody would give a crap about today. It's kind of ironic. It's kind of funny, like thinking about like, oh, the Pope endorsed that. Like 10% of our population today would care about that.
Yeah, no kidding. And even then it would be a little shaky, right?
Yeah. Oh, clergymen are immune to witchcraft. No one would give a crap.
Yeah, I know. You're right.
It's kind of crazy.
It's funny how things change, don't they? Yeah. Like, really. And, there's more that kind of lends itself for me to believe that this is all based on lies. And, not only is it based on lies, it's like, I don't think the truth had anything to do with this. And that's like something I want to kind of ask you as we go on with this. Like, do you think that Heinrich himself believed what he was saying in this thing is true? Do you think he was believing any of these words?
Why don't you just ask him?
Oh, I wish I could.
I have a Ouija board right here.
Oh, come on, dude! You cannot do not play around with these names. I feel like that's the most evil name you could.
Dear Mr. Heinrich.
No, dude, don't. All right.
All right. I mean,
Listen,
who knows what his intentions are? Like we said, like there could be reasons he is this vengeful, this spiteful towards women. There could be maybe just maybe it's just something, a vulnerable spot he saw in society, and he's like, I'm going to capitalize on that.
yeah.
People are going to believe me because hey, they don't know any wiser, and hey, why not pick a very vulnerable population of people because they're not going to speak up against me, and then actually somebody does, and that's kind of like not probably the norm for the time for someone to spit in his face and
No.
get a lawyer to back them up. Like he probably felt like this was going to be a very easy sell, and it's almost like maybe he was more of a businessman than he's like a witch hunter.
Oh, he definitely created a position for himself that he literally could never be removed from.
Yeah.
And it's one of those. Another thing he would do, Dave, is think about it, because you were bringing up something about how people kind of have to believe that, because if they don't believe in this text, then they're essentially going to be punished by this text.
Yeah.
Which is crazy, right? He's sort of created this catch-22. Another thing he does is he threatens people with torture until they confess, or he'll just torture them if that doesn't work. And when they confess, two things happen. It increases the validity of the text because it's saying, "Oh, look, this person just admitted to being a witch, so there are witches, and we do have to catch them." Also, they would, when people do sort of admit it, a lot of times they would let them go, so that now they're saying, and the rules that we have that kind of save the soul of the witch, that works too. So it's like self-perpetuating. This thing keeps itself going by, with its own lies. It's got this built-in sort of system where it's like, if they admit that they're a witch, great. If they deny that they're a witch, great. It doesn't matter, because either way, this text holds up.
Sure.
Which is,
So kind of looking at again that population of people that he's attacking being women. Here's kind of like a little highlight of maybe like his thoughts about women, or why this was such a vulnerable population. So the text claims that women are more susceptible to demonic possession due to their lack of physical and spiritual strength and their promiscuous nature. So just right there, like their lack of physical strength. Why would they lack physical strength? So gender roles. They're not in like positions where they're doing like heavy labor, and that's not by their choice, that's by societal roles, right? So we're taking an obvious trait about them and we're making that one of the, like, we're turning them into vulnerable creatures, right? And then we're also saying that they're passive, like with their spirituality and their promiscuous nature. Like that's also kind of starting to look at ways to pick them out too. So if they're not just if they don't just stay very solid in their role, and they become promiscuous, quote unquote, then there I go, I can easily target that.
Promiscuous, smart, useful. They targeted midwives a bunch.
Yeah, it's anything outside of the gender norm is going to be targeted. So it's someone with a strong personality.
But hold on, let me ask you this.
Poor elder.
Because you're bringing up an interesting point here. So I would argue that, they're claiming in this text, and then in other parts in this text, it'll kind of like counter that or contradict it, because he's saying that women or men are the more powerful, mentally, whatever. But this whole thing is built to protect men away from the temptations of women. So who's really more powerful here?
Yeah, but what it's really doing is back to the dark psychology episode that we did ages ago now, and it's keeping ranks. So maybe there was a period of time where there was a concern that women were stepping outside of their gender roles, or women were becoming a louder voice in the society, and they wanted to quiet them. They wanted to take away their voice, and maybe that's why they targeted those women. Like it's all about that hierarchy, which we've talked about before. It's all about, I'm going to create fear in society so that people stay and maintain their roles. And when they don't, we're going to find a way to scare them back into their roles. And if they refuse to go back into the roles, then we're just going to light them on fire or torture them.
And then just like we talked about with the 7 deadly sins, like those are taking you, if you're going against those, then you're falling out of these roles. And if you're, as long as you're staying kind of controllable, the powers that be are happy, like you're saying. And how do they stay controllable? By believing in this dogma that we've created. And the people that they're punishing are people who are kind of stepping slightly out of that. Like, oh, maybe I'm using this, like these midwife techniques, and I have this. I guess what we're saying is knowledge. Like, knowledge has always been dangerous, maybe because knowledge on some level equals science, and that's scary to
Yeah, like
religion.
I think about like it says midwives or healers were more likely to be be accused. Healers I can understand, like you said, knowledge, but also it's like they're kind of taking a role. They have like a little bit of a role of power, and maybe that role is useful, but maybe at some point it becomes a little threatening as well, because then that person becomes someone that people might rely on, might trust, might go to for information. So there might be reason to quiet that person.
Yeah, you
That
could be.
person might not be complacent like people outside of that role.
Right. So as we go on here, obviously we're going to be talking something about. I'm interested in whether or not like people thought this was true. And I guess from the out, like from our standing in our point of view, it's easy to say no. But I think, like, I always like that William James quote where he says, "A diamond is soft until something touches it," right? And then it's like he says, "Well, what's not true about that statement?" Like, a diamond is soft until something touches it. I mean, you can't really say there's something wrong with that statement. You can't really say it's
Yeah,
untrue.
you can't prove it until, well, you can never prove it actually. It's
Right,
unprovable.
right. So what he's trying to say is, like, in times like this, if it doesn't contradict what you already know, and it serves a purpose, and it can be validated, corroborated, and verified, then it's true, and you can do all those things with this book, right? Like, if a guy is possessed and he's freaking out, and then a priest comes over, and maybe he's just having a seizure, but when the priest gets there, he calms down because the seizure's over. Everyone who saw that just saw something true happen. To them, that priest cured that situation. And it's
Mhm.
like, maybe there's something there when it comes to the truth. Truth is sort of this weird thing. Like, I don't know, like, if we say this song is beautiful, or Dave is a good person, like, is that true?
It's all subjective.
I know,
So
right? So is
so
truth subjective?
the thing with this though is the people that probably had the most influence to change or resist this also benefited from this. So that would be men. So as long as men were not the ones targeted, why would I want to ruffle feathers? Because then also I'm afraid that I'm going to look like I'm guilty of something. So I'm not going to ruffle feathers, but also I'm not really being targeted anyway, and I kind of like my role with power and just ability to, have these gender dynamics continue.
Yeah.
So I might as well just go along with this, right?
Like, yeah, like, you're at home and you're like, is my wife docile and calm, or is this making her like more um observant to me? Is this making
Yeah.
her be the way I want her to be? Because if she steps out on me, or if I lose her, if I'm in fear, I can act however I want, because if she ever sort of makes any attempt to change my life or leave me or whatever, she's a witch, and that's over.
Yeah.
And
Here's the crazy thing. In a way, this does for society exactly what the Bible does for society. It gives you guidelines to live by. So
Mhm.
when we look at like the 10 commandments, for example, those are guidelines. We have a story given to us about them being on these, stones and Moses and all this stuff. Is that story true? Or is that more symbolic and representative of how society should exist? The same goes for this. It's just like a guideline for how society is supposed to exist, except it's using stories and fear. Well, I guess the Bible kind of uses fear as well.
Yeah,
They're both basically made to shape behavior, right?
absolutely.
Shape and model behavior. One is used to better society. And I will argue, and I think you would argue the same, that this one was clearly not as well intentioned as the Bible.
No,
And
no.
and then that kind of obviously, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, but like leads to the church condemning this. as false only 3 years after it appeared, right?
Right. But by then,
3 years is a long time.
3 years is a lot of fires, and it's not, great. So yeah, but there's something, Dave, go on a little trip with me here, because Maslow, a friend of ours, right? A huge, important humanist psychology figure, hierarchy of needs, right? Everyone knows Maslow, but his lesser known stuff is his law of instrument. And I think that you're going to see that in a way, we have our own Malleus Maleficarum that we use. So think about this, right? It's a great quote that he has. I suppose it's tempting, if the only tool you have is a hammer, to treat everything as if it's a nail. So Maslow's talking about something here that I think is really interesting, and there's a French word for it, and I'll just try. It's deformation professionnelle, and it's where we look through things through the lens of our profession, and only through the lens. It's like a confirmation bias. But think about it like this, right? You and I, if we have the same patient, we're gonna think, all right, I can heal this person's depression, I can heal this person's anxiety without medication. If he goes next door to like one of the prescribers, they're going to see the same thing and think, oh, this person needs a prescription. This person needs drugs, right? The same way a physical therapist is going to see like a messed up knee and say, you need these kinds of exercises and stretches. And that same patient's going to go to a surgeon and they're going to say, you need an operation, right? Like, it's this weird thing that we do really see the world through the lens of our professions. Democrats see what Democrats see, Republicans see what Republicans see, Inquisitors see witches, that's for sure, right? They're seeing, he's viewing the world through the lens of his profession, right? So he's seeing a lot of witches. Now, Dave, when I said our Malleus Maleficarum, we see a patient, we see someone come into our room, and we have to pick something out of a little book and decide what's them too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what does that make us, right? So no one's leaving the office without a diagnosis. So we have to pluck that diagnosis out of a book roughly the same size and call them something.
Yeah.
Is that uncomfortable?
I mean, I think we've touched on this in the past, and just as much as like how we don't necessarily like the process, but it's like a necessary evil that's been laid out to us by insurance companies versus our own desire to tack on a label after meeting them the first time.
But do you think Kramer ever said that? This is a necessary evil, this book? Yes, maybe I'm going to get some witches wrong, but like overall, I'm doing the world some good.
Well, I mean, I think that's the justification that I was mentioning. It's like, is this facts? Possibly not. But if I can weed out as many witches as possible, then who's going to complain?
You're right. All right. Yeah. So Maslow was talking about that. He also said something that I think is kind of important, and he's talking about the law of not just the law of instruments, but he thinks that it's strange that we're reducing people in psychology to certain little things. Like, so we turn love and passion, fear and anger, all these things into basic chemistry. And I think that's something that's happening here too, right? We're taking characteristics of people who might exist sort of on the fringes, and we're reducing them into just this one little thing. And I don't know, I think that's really dangerous. And we still kind of do these kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's why I think it's so important that people stay open-minded. We have so much knowledge today, and we have so much ability to understand the errors of our past and some of the fears or the issues that go on when people are super rigid-minded. But yet I see it every single day. I see it, within our field. I see it within sometimes coworkers. I sometimes myself. Like, people can get very rigid-minded, and we can get just like, that's all right. So, like, think about it. Why do you think that for our profession in doing therapy, we are highly encouraged, and for many years we're required to do supervision? It's so you can get an outside point of view on a case, so that it's another set of fresh eyes looking at the same thing, to prevent us from just blindly like going forward with blinders on, right? And only seeing it through, like you said, through our confirmation bias, or just like through our like this is how I'm going to treat them and this is what's going to work for them, and then you're like it didn't work, and you're like oh well I either you just keep trying that one way or you're like oh well nothing can help them. You need
Yeah,
that
and then or
outside
you and then
perspective.
you bring it to other people's perspective, and they maybe they see something you've been missing all along. And you're like,
Exactly.
oh my god, yeah,
Exactly. That's why
absolutely.
that's so important. That's why it's so dangerous to just do things alone
I agree with
without
that 100%.
yeah
And
without outside help and voices and opinions.
yeah, because the more voices, the more minds you can get on something, the better. There's also this element of priming, Dave. What do you know about priming?
Explain.
Okay, it's like this when you all right. I'll explain it super easy. Ready? When I say dog, you say what?
Collar.
Okay, well, when I say salt, you say
Wound.
okay, dude. You don't say either of those things. All right.
Or try
So
one more.
okay,
Fun.
when I say ketchup, you say
Mayo.
okay. Yep. You're great at this. That so, but you get the point, right? It's like this exposure to like any stimulus influences how a person will respond to subsequent and related stimulus. Like our brain, it's adapted to more readily process certain kinds of information after being exposed. So we don't even know that we're doing these things. Like always show it in that psych class. I always show this little 4 square box where I write bath, towel, water, and then I wrote SO and I leave a little space and then I write P and I said what's this last word? And every single time they say soap. And I'm like, you guys are just being led down a certain path with a certain amount of information and you've guaranteed me that that last word is something. And there's no reason why. I didn't say it has to fit in the group. I didn't say anything like that. And so we kind of do that and you can see that happening here with this book. It's like everything in the world's pointing to like there's devils and there's evil in the world, and so they're primed to look for witches. So when you're looking for something, you find it, right?
Right.
So I think that at this time period they were primed to see witches, and I think the majority of people genuinely thought that they were killing witches.
Yeah.
And then a good number of people, a great number of people, were taking advantage of other people's misfortune for sure.
Yeah.
Like just like we saw in Salem.
How many women were murdered during this time?
So they say the numbers are 200,000 to 500,000, and that's just people that were executed for witchcraft. But 85% of those were women.
Wow.
That's dude. So you're talking about a book that killed hundreds of thousands of people. That is wild. So that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Like it's sort of a heavy, important text, and it just makes me think of that Nietzsche quote that whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process they don't become monsters themselves, right? Like you're witch hunting, you're creating an other, you're rationalizing to make egregious acts feel okay. It's like where have we seen this? Like we've seen this throughout history. I mean, this happens to be in Germany, but we see it again in Germany
Right.
down the road. It's what did the Nazis have to tell themselves? What stories did they have to like? How do they have to create an other? How do they have to rationalize to kill, women and children? And I remember actually reading a narrative in this book, Ordinary Men, where one of the men was saying when he had to kill like families, he would kill the woman first, and then he would feel fine about killing the kids because how can he leave the kids alone in the world without a mother? Isn't that
Yeah.
It's like, this is kind of things that happen throughout history. It's
Doesn't it feel like in a way the Bible also gets used in this manner? Like people try to look and decode messages to support these like let's say I don't agree with this population of people,
Mhm.
right? Or this, whatever. I'll look for passages in the Bible that I can make interpret to support that, that shouldn't exist. And I use that to, make my case of why that group of people is bad.
Absolutely. The curse of Ham. That the whole thing
The
with
curse of
Noah.
green eggs and ham.
That's right.
Yeah.
You remember from
Yeah.
Genesis,
Yes.
Psychogenesis.
Yeah, Phil Collins and stuff.
That's right. That's right. So, that's that whole thing where, Noah was naked and something happened, right? One of the grandsons or whatever. And they kind of like derive this whole curse They say it mentions something about dark skin, but in the original text, it was a punishment for behavior, not for any kind of ethnicity. It doesn't mention skin color. It doesn't mention race at all. And this is the part of the Bible that they use to say like, hey, slavery's fine. And there's something in Leviticus too that mentions something kind of innocuous, and people are like, oh yeah, see, this is where the Bible says you can't be gay. But come on, so many people were like, so many more like homosexuality was kind of way more accepted centuries ago as opposed to the way it is now. Well,
Oh, geez. Like
it was.
Roman times.
Oh, are you kidding me? Alexander the Great too. Even the Greeks, Macedonia, like that
He
was.
dabbled all over the place.
He was. He was.
He was
had
tap dancing over all those sexual orientations.
Oh
He
yeah.
didn't give a crap.
No one knew what was going on with that guy, and that's just fine. And he was like,
Caligula. Come on.
Caligula, forget it, right? Even the animals weren't safe. Caligula's house. So Dave, like, why the focus on women in this thing?
Like I said, in my opinion, I think this all comes back down to maintaining some status of gender roles, some status of hierarchy in society, making sure that the meek stay meek and the powerful stay powerful, using religion as a source to do so, and then also maybe even a little bit of, dare I say, population control. I mean, we're talking about, one of the things I mentioned was like, aside from women with strong personalities, also targeting like the poor and the elderly.
Yeah.
And like maybe looking at them as if, hey, are they a burden on society? Are they costing us more than they're worth? Things like that.
You're kind of like talking about like eugenics, and still we're in Germany again.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of like a dark kind of thing to think about.
One of the things that would cause some of this fear, and one of the things that they would use to like instill this fear, failed crops. If you have failed crops, you have less food. If you have less food, you have hungry people. If you have hungry people, you have low morale, right?
Yeah.
You have sad situations happening on the street. You have people who like can't eat and are starving, and you have, if I don't want to ration my food, I need to eliminate how many people I'm feeding. Think about that.
And also, like, you want to have a reason why it's happening, because you want to be able to say, all right, look, yeah, the crops didn't go well this year, and that's because this witch did that. And now that she's gone, I have a chance. I have hope for next year.
Yeah. So you're creating energy in order to make people feel hopeful that next year will be better, so they don't stop trying. So you're keeping that flow of like crops and harvesting and all that stuff going, and also you're hopefully having less people to feed. That's, I mean, what a crazy, but like so like
You almost said
plausible
genius.
reason, right?
Yeah.
No, not genius. Not genius.
Honestly, if you read this thing, like this guy, he was so smart and thorough. That's what makes it even scarier. And it's also that thing where it's, using something that everyone can identify with as being good to do bad things. Like we talked about grooming.
Yeah.
Right? Like the priests, the cops, teachers, coaches, Boy Scouts, whatever. Like taking something that we all can recognize as safe and good and trustworthy, something with like a reputation, and using it to commit evil acts, right? Like it's so that the whole book's about punishing, like the good punishing the wicked. And that's what it's like resting its laurels on. But the reality is it's the wicked punishing the good.
Yeah.
Which is,
absolutely.
it's twisted.
The other thought that just came to my head is also this is like heavily targeting women with like sexuality.
Yeah.
Right? So like any expression of sexuality is scary to them at this time. So I mean, I would have to assume that there's a level of like prudishness and purity that's like desired. So it makes me wonder if at this time there was like kind of a sexual revolution going on, like in like obviously a very toned down way than what that would mean in like the 60s or 70s.
Yeah.
But like something like, are they starting to dabble in sex before marriage? Is that meaning that, men are meeting women and they're not virgins and that's not desirable to them, and things like that? Like, is there another reason that this was happening that kind of fit more in what was happening at that time?
Well,
And
this is at the time of the Renaissance.
well, there
So
you
it's
go.
like we're looking at the Romans and the Greeks. Like, what were they up to?
Yeah,
Okay, they were kind of getting
sure.
they were doing some stuff.
So like, we don't want our women to be promiscuous is like the word that they used, right?
Yeah.
So I can do this, and then hopefully that will keep them in line.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and apparently, a lot of women still said no and acted the way they wanted to act, and it just didn't really end well
Sure.
for them for 3 years. Um, just let me just give you some, you know, like a little example from each part, right? Because this thing's kind of based in questions, and the way you it's like the way you approach this text is interesting because it'll pose a question and then it'll give some answers, but that's the wrong answers, and then it'll say the right answer. It's almost like it does like a dialogue kind of thing, like Plato or something. So it's not like just listing it out. It's here's a question, and let me kind of argue about it with myself. So it's actually kind of interesting. So in part one, there's a question, and the question's asking why a larger number of sorcerers are found among the delicate female sex than among men. What type of women are more often found to be superstitious and sorceresses? So right there, it's saying like, yes, way more women are involved in sorcery than men. Like, what's up with that? That's like a question from part one. Another question, part two is, and this one's interesting to me, the method by which midwife sorceresses inflict greater losses when they either kill or offer babies up to demons by dedicating them with a curse. Like, so here's another important role in society. Here's another way that this book and why the Catholic Church had to get rid of it is like you're taking away the midwives from society and blaming infant deaths on them. How many think more infant deaths do you think there are when you get rid of all the midwives? And why would you want to be a midwife, this difficult role, if people are, you're going to get accused of witchcraft? Like, the why? I mean, why midwives? Why do they focus on midwives? I mean, like, I'm sure we can think of some reasons, right?
Yeah, I'm struggling with that one a little bit more than the other ones.
Well, I mean, they're smart. They have a lot of knowledge. They probably have to use remedies, which would, lend itself to, um, witchcraft. They could give abortions at this time with like certain roots and mixtures. So, I
There you
mean,
go.
they are sort of magical. I mean, it's science, right? They're
So
using
if I'm a
science.
woman that is pregnant now, and maybe it's an illegitimate child, or uh, I was not wed, pregnant before being wed, I would go to this midwife and she would be able to support me. And obviously, this is like heresy to the Catholic Church, and therefore, yeah, I can see that.
But the reality is, it would normally be, or I think 9 times out of 10, or 10 times out of 10, be a man in a higher position who impregnates like a young girl or something, and he takes the girl to the midwife. And
Yeah.
then how does he know that she's a midwife? How does he know that she could do these sort of perform these sort of, I don't know, not rituals, but she has this kind of like knowledge because he's put himself in a situation where he's had to find that out, and now he's using that against her. It's
And
crazy.
then he also benefits from her not being around, because then he can make sure that she's not going to leak his information.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's a great point too. And then because if she starts to leak his information, she's already been accused a witch, and her words are all lies.
Yes.
It works perfectly to control.
I'm telling you, all this just leads back to the same point. It's all about controlling. It's that dark psychology. It's all about control. It's all about the hierarchy of power and just keeping people in their roles.
Listen to this. This is a thing I found in Proverbs. So he who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the just, both of them are alike, are abomination to the Lord. So it's like, even in the Bible, they're saying like this kind of thing is completely evil, but it's just, it's life. So they can kind of get away with whatever they want. I don't know. I find this like, I just think that it's such a fascinating thing that someone was able to write something so credible, um, that people actually believed it and used it to kill thousands and thousands and thousands of people. It's just this kind of stuff. Can it even exist anymore? Is there anything
Absolutely.
really like social media? I guess you're still saying, right?
There's probably people in society today that could write something like this and would have a large enough following to be able to carry out some of it. Sure.
Well, you know what's funny?
I think the divide would be a lot larger because there's no one thing that the general population will just blindly follow today. It's like one or the other of
That's right.
things.
Like
Like,
this was very much relying on a whole population believing
yeah,
in like being religious.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah, that was like the thing. I
and I
mean,
don't know.
now you have like sub populations, which are obviously significantly smaller than what this would have been.
So we have no universal sort of. I don't know. That's a good thing and a bad thing, I guess. We have no universal or objective morality anymore, and we talked about that how
Yeah,
we're not sure that's such a good thing.
I don't think that's a good thing.
I
Yeah, the
don't
more
either.
even just the way you said it out loud, I was like, no, that's actually horrible. Think
Yeah.
about it. It
Well,
it highlights the divide in our world that is so strong.
and that's why I think, people commit more and more like sort of egregious acts because there's no lanes anymore. There's no
Yeah.
like nothing keeping us in line. I don't know. So this is obviously taking advantage of that. Um, I don't know. That's a complicated issue.
Absolutely.
It really is. Um, and this is just to me this was an interesting thing. I don't know. What did you think?
So I mean, yeah, it's definitely something.
Yeah. It's definitely a big old book. We
Big
know
book.
that.
Yeah, this pop culture, I mean, a great like view of this, and this is a stolen idea. I was listening to somebody else talk about it, but they brought up the movie The Witch, and I think that that was a good example of like a visual representation of some of the themes here. So the movie The Witch, like, there's issues with like their crops, um, even like budding sexuality in a younger female, and just like the views of the parents and the fear that the parents have. Like, I think that kind of highlights like some of what we're talking about here. Maybe not like the book itself and kind of the punishments that are within it, but more of like just that fear that this kind of thought process instilled in people. And I know we talked about that movie The Witch, I think, when we did the Salem witch trial episodes.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, I love that movie. But like, yeah, that fear was real.
Well, what about Dave? Like, as you're talking about, I'm thinking, you know, all right, so you're a guy and you have this family, and then there's like this young like woman in town. She's beautiful, and like you have these Puritan values, and you're thinking, your family's important to you, God's important to you. No matter if I step out of a line on any of these things, like I'm going to hell. A very like repressed society, and you have this woman look at you, and you're like, I'm willing to kind of just give. I don't care about any of that in this moment. I'll lose it all just for
She
that.
must be a witch
Right,
for
you're
making me
probably
feel that
thinking that.
way.
Like, how does
Here's
she?
the crazy thing. So like today we understand that that does not make someone a witch, right? Or
No,
that's our understanding as of today. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe
dude,
we are
truth.
wrong.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. Truth is
Like,
very funny.
we have a belief of what is right and wrong today, and we have an understanding that that is somewhat of a normal feeling. And it's almost like we've like justified it by saying like, and it's kind of, I actually saw this book the other day, and it was like kind of funny because it was like very like old school mindset as far as like men are more like um just kind of painting the picture of men being more like on the prowl and
Men are
like
from Mars, women are from Venus, kind of
yeah,
thing.
it's like, yeah, exactly, like where we'd be more like on the hunt for that kind of stuff, and it's just men's nature to be that way. But isn't that almost like a justification for that behavior versus like, I don't know, some other kind of understanding? It's like we always like either it's witchcraft or it's like that's just, men have that animal instinct in them. It's like maybe it's actually something else.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because like these things are sometimes really bad, and they're sometimes like seven deadly sins. Like we know that's a control measure, but at the
Yeah.
same time, like you can't just like give into your lust anytime you want. Like you
Right.
can't just take control of something. Like there is something about like, yes, it's supernatural to have every single one of these impulses. Every single one of the seven deadly sins is like intrinsic in us. It's fine, right? But like you can't just take from people. You can't just steal from
Right.
someone because you're envious. Right? You know what I mean? Like you can't steal from because you're gluttony, whatever, gluttonous, whatever. You can't just act out any impulse you have. And I think that's maybe it's the seven deadly sins are an overcorrection, but it's like that's there. That makes sense,
Yeah.
right?
Like, so basically, I shouldn't blame a woman because I have an urge or something. But I also shouldn't say, well, that's just because I'm a man and that's what I do. And then
Yeah.
like that's justifying my behavior. So like I still don't think we have it all right. You know what I
No, we
mean?
don't have it all right.
So there's still growth for us, and it'll be funny what like in like 20 or 30 years, like what we like sort of our mind frame is around some of these things if it changes over time, even more so. Um, but yeah, I think that some of it's kind of interesting, and just as far as like some of these concepts about why this happens, or just like the justification and stuff like that, and how it's like shifting blame makes it easier for us to justify our own bad behavior too.
What about just the fact that maybe Heinrich Kramer was one of those incel guys?
Yeah. Yeah.
I still say that deserves its own episode. That's a fascinating little subculture to me.
Well, yeah.
I
Okay.
mean, we won't be able to get it in time for Valentine's Day, but maybe next year.
So Greg, we had a couple of reviews this year. I mean this week.
Okay. All right, what do we got?
So we had two great reviews on Apple. I'm pulling them up now. But while I pull them up, I will just mention, if as you're listening to this, you would be so kind. Whoa, we just got a third one actually. That's crazy. All right. So if you would be so kind as to leave a review and let us know what you are thinking as you are listening, that would be absolutely wonderful. Obviously, wait till the episode's done to make sure that you fully believe what you're about to write, and so that it's very positive. Hopefully, the end of the episode is the best part when we say goodbye. I'm sure you all love that part.
Yeah.
But yeah, here's the first one. This was a nice one from Rain. Did I already read this one
I don't know.
last time?
Maybe.
I might have read this one.
All right, go to the next one then.
All right, Maple Cordova. This is the best podcast about psychology out there, or physiology. I listen to it all the time and have learned so much from it. Also, if y'all see this, please do more on true crime / serial killers, because that's so much fun to listen to than other true crime episodes on other podcasts. That means the world to me. I love those episodes. So Maple Cordova, you're in luck. I have plugged one in for this month that I think will be something that people will enjoy hearing, or at least I hope so. We just got a new one. Clearly, someone that knows Greg. Do you know who this is?
I don't. I'm
All
trying to
right, it
figure it
says
out right now.
love to listen in the gym, love the sharpened tears. That is by M. McCord.
You know what's funny about that? That's I don't know who that is, and maybe they think that like we're brothers or something.
Oh, weird. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Like maybe they
We're
looked
not
up what,
brothers. I have a different last name.
but I know, but maybe they looked me up and they're like, oh, this is probably like Charpentier Brothers.
Charpentier Brothers. Yeah. Well, if you are insinuating that, then
Thank you.
we're not brothers, but still, thanks for listening. I love the feedback. Thank you very much. I will just read this one from Rain because I can't remember if I read it. No, I definitely read it last week. Never mind. So yeah, couple of new ones. Thank you guys so much for that feedback. It's awesome. Love to hear it. Yeah, and also, if you're not on Apple, you don't have Apple Podcasts, you can always leave a rating on Spotify. You just can't leave a review there. We just love hearing what people are thinking about our episodes. Obviously, a lot of work goes in this. And then I don't know if you guys have noticed, we've taken like 1 week off in 2 years. So like, obviously this has just been ongoing work. Yeah.
Think about it in like terms of you're writing a paper every single week of your life.
Absolutely.
That's what it is.
And then when you're not writing the paper, you are thinking about like
the next paper,
or you're worried about like what posts you got to make to advertise for the paper. And like, you got to make an advertisement for the paper. There's like so many different things that also go along with this. It is somewhat of a tedious and full job, but we enjoy doing it. So that's why we love to hear the feedback that people give, the messages that we've received on social media, the reviews, the ratings. It all just means so much to us. Even if you're not totally connecting to what we have to offer, it's okay. You know, we still appreciate hearing it as long as it's in a respectful way. Hasn't gone that in a disrespectful way yet, so hopefully it won't, but you never know. It's still early. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. This was our start of February episode. We have a few more. It's Valentine's month. It's Black History Month. So, we'll clearly be covering both of those things in the upcoming weeks. So just kind of hang on and for those. And you guys can thank Greg for a random witchcraft one in the middle of February.
Yep.
All right.
You're welcome.
That's it. Yep. Okay, everybody. Have a great night. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.